Thank you, Christine, and hello, everyone. Many thanks for your participation today. I want to also thank Robin and other colleagues on the One Health Poultry for this kind invitation. Going by the running title, Building Back and Building Better, I want to echo a well-known saying that in a crisis, you shouldn't waste it. And I think our discussion today is to see how we could use the current crisis to build back and fight some of the issues that we're all facing. Can I go to the next slide, please? We all know that the poultry sector is global. It is mature and also very strong. The poultry sector is well embedded in the private sector fabric and is also well supported by in some cases by the public sector. My remarks will be biased towards the public sector and also biased towards low and middle income countries. We therefore should ensure that the poultry sector is effectively harnessed to deliver socio-economic and other benefits to relevant beneficiaries. And the question is always, who are the beneficiaries? Can we effectively identify them? Can we measure how much impact we're having on them? And the reality is that we haven't succeeded in using the poultry sector effectively to do that. And they are nonetheless excellent initiatives. I think some of them may have been highlighted throughout this series. And towards the end of this, I'll have the opportunity to touch on one or two things that we are doing. It is always good to go back and see where we have come from. I use this USDA chart on the table here to see the global trends and the important points that this slide gives us. One is the demand for poultry products is always increasing and will continue to increase in the foreseeable future. Of course, that's related to the increasing population. How can we meet that demand? You know, it's really projected. And the demand for consumption is actually everywhere, whether you're in advanced economies and low income economies, we can see the demand. And the question here is, how do we meet that? If you look at this graph here, you will see that in sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East, and also Southeast Asia, the importation is actually expected to increase. Then the key question is, how do we then balance local production versus imports? Because I think in looking at that, we can actually see who are the consumers, who do we need to satisfy? Can I go to the next slide, please? I also want to recognize that, and I hope many of you agree that poultry has an important role to play in our food systems. And the food systems are quite complex. Regardless of where you are, we have to understand them better so that they can be resilient, they can deliver, and they can also sustainably produce for and meet emerging challenges. Do we understand the food system? To some extent, we understand them, but we've always generalized them. And there are many important parameters that we have to consider when we come to the food systems. And the more we understand this, the more we can understand who are we actually producing, in this case, poultry, to satisfy. And the growing population is one of the things. Sustainable production with less impact on the environment is also another important challenge that the food system face. Safe food, nutritious, and also impacting those who are most vulnerable is also an important consideration. On this map here, we have the hunger map for 2020. And we see here that sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia are really vulnerable. And yet we're expected, and there are possibilities for poultry to be produced in those areas. How can we do that? Earlier on, there was a case of a lot of poultry production in India, but in the same area, you have a lot of malnutrition. How can we deliver? How can we balance that? And I think this is where I want to echo that some of these are wicked problems in nutrition. And these are problems that do require non-conventional solutions to address them. And I think that's one of the things that we have to address here. Next slide, please. And from the consumers and producers' perspective, it is important to examine the key driver for poultry production. Often for poultry as another animal agriculture product, producers do so for themselves, for their communities. And essentially, the argument I'm making here is a lot of what is produced is for local consumption. How do we make that? Can I go to, still on this slide, sorry. And I think when we are looking at the drivers, we have to consider safety of what is produced. What is the value chain from production, transformation, and ending up on the plates of those who have to consume it. And we should also be anticipating some of the drivers for the production to be sure that we actually meeting anticipating some of the problems. And finally, on this slide here, I want to look at poultry as an important parameter or a component of a food system or a production system where we're also likely going to have other livestock commodities. In a situation where we have pig system, for instance, we have to be very careful not for pigs to become the mixing vessel and transmitting influenza and stuff like that. There are many other things that we can talk about the production system, looking at the driver to ensure that it's this safe. Can I go to the next slide, please? So production system in sub-Saharan Africa are not homogeneous. On this slide here, I'm using the example of Ethiopia, a country where through the work in the center with partners at the International Livestock Research Institute at Nottingham University, we're looking at different production systems. And what we've been able to do here is really to understand what are the drivers, socio-economic drivers, but what's also the drivers in the agro-systems. What is the temperature? What is the disease pressure? What is also the importance of social considerations? Can I go to the next slide, please? On this one here is really the key thing to highlight here is the power of putting data together. And what we've been done here is really doing niche modeling to ensure that we understand what is needed and how we could support the farmers to make decisions and focusing on harnessing genetic diversity available locally. And I should also mention here that what I was not able to really bring onto here is the assessment of genetic diversity in sub-Saharan Africa. We have used molecular markers and other phenotypic characterization to see the extent of diversity. And the key question here is, what are the things that we can do to sort of harness that diversity? And on this slide here, there is a lot of information from Ethiopia. And we have demonstrated that whether you're in high altitude, middle altitude, or low altitude, the disease pressure, the production system, the farmer preference and consumer preferences are also well understood. And this can support some of the decisions that can be made. Let me leave it here and thank you so much.